Hello and welcome to the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we're continuing our watch of the last season of the Clone Wars, and today we'll be talking about episodes 7 and 8. All that right after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined today by Paul Hoppy, my other host. Paul, we got more of the Ahsoka story. How are we feeling about this today?
Pretty good for multiple reasons. I mean, I enjoyed these two episodes, and then I think, spoiler alert, I guess, I guess it's not necessary, but it seems like she's going to be in the rest of the season, or at least the next episode or two.
Yeah. So, and just letting folks know, we started out doing one episode at a time. We wound up doing two last time and realizing it actually works pretty well, especially when they're kind of linked like these two were again. It's in part also because we thought we were going to do it day by day with 8 episodes. It turns out there were 12 because I'm bad at reading lists. But in my defense, I was trying to be very careful not to get spoiled.
Yeah, very spoiler-filled lists.
Yeah, exactly. So we are recording today about episodes 7 and 8. The last 2 episodes of the Ahsoka, Trace, Rafa story. So if you've not seen all those, definitely hit pause, go back and watch those, and then we'll go forward and get spoiled. So Paul, you want to give us just a quick summary of what happens in these 2 episodes?
Yeah, so in the first episode, they try to escape, and then they get caught. And then in the second episode, basically the same thing happens. But in a more complicated way. The first one, I'd say there's a certain amount of character development in terms of we learn the backstory of the Martez sisters, which is kind of what we thought it would be. I'll let you make the metaphor, and then I'll make the other metaphor that's the same metaphor.
What's the metaphor you thought I was going to make?
Well, basically that the Jedi are essentially kind of like Scarlet Witch in...
Oh, yes, exactly.
Captain America's Civil War, right?
Yeah, in terms of the story about what happened to the Jedi's parents, to the Mendez sisters' parents, that was exactly what I typed when I was watching it to you, because it's basically what we have, is we have a situation where the Jedi are attempting to mitigate the damage that's caused, and to some extent they do succeed in that they, it seems like instead of 100 people dying, maybe 5 people die. But 5 people still do die. Mm-hmm. And you can get into all sorts of arguments about whether like that kind of perfection is to be expected or how you go about that. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But I think that's what's most important for this story, at least, is the Jedi seem to have no compassion about those 5 deaths. And instead, they just say, well, we did the best we could, and may the Force be with you.
Right. And I mean, I think it sort of comes from, because of their level of detachment, they're able to make utilitarian decisions like that pretty easily. Right. On the other hand, because they have that level of detachment, they're unable to demonstrate the level of empathy for essentially the victims of that utilitarianism. And then also, I just wanted to add that I think it's Martez, right? The sisters are, they're also kind of like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver from Age of Ultron, who are like casual, whose parents are, basically killed by Ultron, but by the Avengers, by the fallout from the battle.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because I think it's interesting. These are one of these episodes where, and you know more about writing than I do, and I think there's a term in the sort of writing industry for when something like this happens. Maybe I'm wrong. But it's basically where, like, the story itself, like, the main plot is fairly generic and not terribly interesting. But what makes the story so good is all of the, like, all right, our people get thrown in jail again. But they have really interesting conversations when they're in jail. Or, like, while they're trying to escape, really interesting things happen. Like, the main part of the story is the stuff that happens along the way, not the main plot.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's just good writing. Like, I'm not sure about any technical term for it, but like, the way I would say it is that instead of all the individual character beats and whatnot being in service to the plot the plot is more like in service to the character beats. It's, you know, them escaping and getting caught again, and then escaping and then getting caught again. It sort of functions as a structure to sort of reveal their characters and, you know, sort of spark conversations between them and debates about, like, well, how should we try to escape? Like, you know, okay, we're gonna get killed. Like, whose fault is that? Doesn't matter whose fault it is. Like, should we focus on, you know, how to maybe not get killed? You know, when was the best time to say, oh yeah, by the way, you know, those people that, you know, you hate because, or avoid, because they don't really say hate, I think they say more the reason we avoid them. Because I feel like there isn't this real, like, antipathy towards the Jedi. There's almost like a contempt, sort of like, yeah, they go around playing space cops saying that they're going to do good, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, but, like, ultimately they leave a path of destruction, you know, in their wake, and they don't seem to have deep feelings towards that, and, you know, basically, I think they're kind of saying, like, yeah, they say they're going to be this thing, and, like, that sounds like a good thing, but they're not that, or they weren't that for us. Where then, like, at the end of the episode, you know, Rafa's basically like, yeah, you are a Jedi, like, or at least you're what I think they should be, you know?
Right. Yeah, just two things. One, just to bounce back to the story thing. I think what you said is very right about, like, here the plot serves the story beats and, or the character beats, especially because honestly, like, I think I was getting a little bit frustrated with the story itself. Like, the capture release, it got a little bit repetitive. Yeah. But the story, the character beats were so good that I didn't really care much.
Right. Like, at the end of the first, episode 7, the first of the two that we're discussing now, I was kind of frustrated with, like, so nothing happened, you know, and then, like, that the next episode, but, like, I wanted to watch the next episode because I enjoyed what did happen, you know? Yeah. So nothing happened really in terms of, like, plot, in terms of, like, moving characters from point A to point B. They were still at point A, right? And then it felt that way towards the end of episode 8 as well. But but what was going on between the characters was good enough that it made me want to see the next one. And, like, I almost watched episode 9 last night. I was like, no, I'm going to force myself to go to sleep.
I had to do the same thing this morning. But no, I 100% get that. Especially because, for me, you know, one thing we've talked about, I mean, for you and I in 30 years of being friends talking about Star Wars, or 25 years or whatever it is, as well as just what I talk about all the time, I talk about on any of the shows where I talk about Star Wars, is I'm always so fascinated on how are the Jedi perceived, you know? I think for Ahsoka, it makes sense, especially because in most of the show, she's dealing with the clones who are pretty much genetically programmed to revere the Jedi, and certainly are taught from
up to
birth.
A point.
Right. Well, you know, until other orders.
Right.
And I think that's part of why I really want to. It's part of why Order 66 has always seemed weird to me because, and I'll say here, I'm also influenced somewhat by the books, the Republic Commando books that I've talked about before. In those books, they really make it clear, like, there's a moment early in one of the books where a very, very novice Jedi is all of a sudden put in control, and a Jedi who doesn't feel very confident in themselves. And the clones, it doesn't compute to them that a Jedi could not know what to do because they're just so used to this. And so if you assume Ahsoka's kind of in that culture, for her to now be in this one of, to me, it was really powerful, especially because I think it really shows how she is in such an interesting place of, you know, you often talk about how immigrants, like, you know, someone in the 1800s leaves Ireland because they think it's terrible and everyone's starving and they can't wait to leave. But then they get here and, like, someone else talks bad about Ireland and they get really annoyed.
Right,
I'm the same way about New York City. Like, I love it. I'll defend it to the death, and I don't ever want to live there again. And I kind of feel like Ahsoka's like that with the Jedi right now. Right. Where, like, I think she thinks to some extent that the sisters are right, but it's also really hard for her to hear because so much of her identity has been wrapped up in this idea that she's a Jedi and the Jedi are good and the Jedi are right.
Yeah.
Well, and so what's your take on what actually happened there? Like, what happened to the sisters' parents, and how the Jedi handled that?
I mean, so, you know, first of all, we only get one third-hand account, basically. Or, right. I mean, I guess it's a first-hand account, right? But they were asleep, I guess, or they didn't see it coming. The parents did, and then they rescued them. So they don't necessarily know exactly what happened. So we don't know exactly what happened. But in terms of, what they said happened, which we don't really have any reason to doubt, but except that, okay. It's like, yeah, when you're fighting battles, trying to chase people or catch them in population centers, like, collateral damage is a big deal, right? It's like, how do you avoid that? And, I'll use an example from New York, which, sort of is like, that's my thing to criticize.
Yeah. Paul and I grew up in New York City together. Yeah.
And I mean, I probably would like to live there again, like not during a pandemic, but
Fair.
We'll see. But the point being, there was this episode where someone on the street shot someone else, like in a big crowd, right? And the first story that we heard is like 9 people shot, by gunmen or whatever.
Right.
And it turned out that what actually happened was that there was one person who shot another person, which is horrible, and I'm pretty sure they were dead, and it was murder. And then there were a bunch of cops, and they all tried to shoot that person who had the gun, and ended up hitting 8 bystanders.
Right.
And that raises, in the real world, there's a very serious question of like, well, how do you actually handle that, right? And we can have our opinions on that, and we could get into that like really deep. But instead of that, what I'd point out is that Star Wars is not the real world, and that the Jedi have these fantastic powers where they actually could do a lot of the things that like we wish like real life, either police or like individuals like trying to intercede in a situation like that could do. Like the Jedi could literally just be like, okay, there's your gun. I've physically removed it from your hand via telekinesis. And now I'm just going to have you float there, and then we'll just go capture you. And it seems like they don't take tacks like that often, or they could even be like, you don't want to run away. And it's like, okay, I don't want to run away, And I mean, I think we're shown that those things don't work with 100% reliability, but it is like, running around with lightsabers and like, cutting off people's limbs and getting in these like the battles the way they do. I feel like because of the powers they have, it seems even more irresponsible than when things like that happen in the real world.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I know that, like, it's something I thought about, again, with the Scarlet Witch and Civil War situation. Like, in theory, at least, cops and military forces are trained to be aware of potential civilian casualties and to, like, if you can take people out with an airstrike, but it's gonna cause civilian deaths, like, maybe you wait to do the airstrike. Obviously, especially overseas, we are not doing that as much as we should, and that's a real problem. And in terms of this specific episode, I will say I can't remember the exact events they're talking about, but it does sound it sounds to me fairly familiar in a way that makes me think that we did actually see this incident in a prior episode of the Clone Wars.
Yeah, it makes me really want to go back and watch it.
And certainly, I do believe that I do remember numerous times where I saw a battle in Coruscant where I was kind of thinking like the Jedi are absolutely bonkers to be fighting this fight now, because look at the, it's the same as like the Superman fighting Zod in Man of Steel, where like people were like, what are you doing? Look at all the innocent casualties you're causing. Yeah. And I think
it's like, take it outside, like outside.
And I think to me, the thing is though, that like, at least Scarlet Witch has this like genuine sense of remorse and upsetness, and like, this can't happen.
Yeah. I
think to me what's the most damning here, but I think in many ways like very well written and perfectly revealing about the Jedi is, as you said, it's that utilitarianism. It's that like, well, only 5 people died instead of 90, so that's better math for the life of the universe, so you should be okay with this. And I think to me that's like, at the heart and soul, that's the fundamental problem with the Jedi, is that they have, I don't remember if it was on this podcast or a different one but I basically said that I feel like the Jedi have respect for life. They don't have respect for individual lives.
Right.
And that's, I think, exactly what you see here.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's to me, it's actually very Elon Musk wanting to reopen his Tesla plant in some ways. Where I mean, where that whole thing sort of like didn't make sense to me at first, and I mean, we don't have to get deep into it, but I think, you know, his perspective seems very similar to that of like, well, humans need to be able to get to Mars and survive and not destroy the planet so that, you know, so that humanity doesn't die out, but like. Right. You know, the safety of individual people seems quite secondary to that mission, which, you know.
And I always want to say to someone like that, like, when someone is willing to say, look, it's okay if a small number of people die because it's going to be much better for the life of everyone as a in the long run, is, okay, you first. You know, and I think this is true I think this is true for the Jedi as well. Like, it's always this attitude of, you know, and yes, the Jedi are often willing to self-sacrifice, and that I give them credit for. But to me, there's a very big difference between, like, a few people have to die, so we will be those few people, versus a few people have to die, so without asking for their consent, we're going to decide, like, these people are going to be the ones who do it, you know?
Yeah. And this seemed very much like a literal trolley problem, right? Except for the thing that, like, on the one track, like, they don't know that the people are there. So it doesn't sound like it's a deliberate, like, oh, there were 5 people standing here and 90 people standing there, so we just dumped the thing on the 5 people. Like, they saw a way of not, you know, killing those 90 people, and it slammed into the wall, and then, you know, then it killed some people. But like, it seems like it wasn't that super deliberate, very clear, completely tortured hypothetical problem. But that it was, you know, more of a real life situation where it's like, yeah, if that happened, it's like, that probably is what most people would do in that spot, you know, not unreasonably. But the deeper thing to me is like, just understanding, if you chase someone in a city and you get into some sort of a battle, like, some innocent, you know, some people who are not involved in this there's a high likelihood of them getting hurt. And it's like, that's not the first time, right? It's not an isolated incident.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it, because in some ways, like, once the trolley is on that track, this is probably the right choice to make. The whole question is, like, the trolley's only on that track because they decided, like, waiting till they're outside of Coruscant airspace to try and track them down wasn't an option, you know?
Right.
And I'm sure there's some convoluted plot reason why they felt that was necessary, but like you said, and this I think is more about the writing, like, the Jedi have sort of the problem that you get anytime you write a super, super powerful either hero or villain, which is that you sometimes have situations where the plot only works because the character is not using the power that you already wrote that they have.
Yes.
You know, and I it's partially why I don't like superly overpowered heroes like Superman or something like that.
Right.
Because, you know, or like even in Star Trek, so many Star Trek episodes they wrote realizing we've created technology, which means this plot can't work. And so there's always like the transporter breaks or the dilithium something or other, you know, like there always has to be this way of saying, and at least there they at least acknowledge that we have the tech instead of here. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. That happens in tons of shows where like in Heroes, like you've got a bunch of characters who get like super powerful, and then they're like, oh, we have to find ways to take these characters' powers away. Otherwise, they're just going to be able to solve everything we throw at them like that, you know? And that is one of the downsides of having super powerful characters, is just like, you end up with these like, well then you can't do this story, you can't do this story, you can't do this story, like stories that maybe relate more to like being a real life human, because like the characters just have such an easy way out of it. And I felt that tension a little bit in this episode where, I mean, there's an extent to which that's what they were doing, right? Where like, you know, it feels like Ahsoka could have gotten them out of the jail cell at any time, right? And when she actually does it the first time, gets herself out, I guess, and Rafa, it seems like she's like not sure it's gonna work. But then, you know, then the second time it's like, I'll just do that, and, you know, no biggie. and there's times when she uses her powers and she's like, oh yeah, no, that's just, I'm just really athletic. Like, I can totally long jump, like, 100 feet or whatever. But, throughout the episode, she's trying to not reveal to them, that she was a Jedi, that she has these powers. And it's like, that's information that's like really pretty important for them to have.
Right.
If they're trying, if they're trying to figure out what they can do, like, it's, and so I understand like why she didn't, and they set that up and et cetera, but like, they do kind of take her power away from her or make her like hide it, and that's sort of why they just end up getting captured, I think, or part of the reason, because like if she was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna, do whatever I need to do, like she'd probably be more effective.
Right, especially if you could say to them, like, look, I'm going to do these things, that way you can do these other things.
Exactly.
And, I mean, once again, like, the narrator is just so bad, because in one of the 2 episodes, I think it's the 7th, the beginning of the 7th, but the narrator basically says, like, Ahsoka now has this terrible choice. Will she reveal that she's a Jedi?
Right, yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, so the question is, do you have 2 of your friends decide they don't want to be your friends anymore because you lied to them? Or do you get your friends killed?
Right.
And like, hello, Mr. Narrator, that's not actually much of a choice. Thank you and good night.
Exactly. It's like, save your friends and then figure out whether they're your friends anymore. Yeah. Like,
one thing I just want to say on the power level thing, and then let's go on to the sisters, or I should talk a little bit more of Ahsoka and her journey. One thing that gets me realizing is that, like, one of the things that makes, I think, the original movie is so good, and this is actually even true of the sequels as well, is we have maybe like a total of 10 minutes total throughout all 6 of those movies, the prequels and then the next trilogy, where Luke is a fully formed, complete in his power Jedi.
Right.
For most of the movies, he's the only Jedi. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's learning. He's developing. He finally fully becomes a Jedi. He defeats Darth Vader in this great battle scene. And then he kind of goes off and hides and like doesn't use his power until one great confrontation with Kylo Ren.
Right.
And so to some extent, you never quite, because it's always like he has the potential to be this plot-breaking machine, but he never quite gets there on screen. And then the prequels and then the Clone War TV show, the whole idea is all of that. You have hundreds of plot-breaking machines running around. And I think it's not in huge ways, but it might be one more way in which all of them suffer, is that it's such a harder thing to write than having like just the one Jedi who is always sort of like, because you always have this idea of like, why can't he use that mind-bending power yet? Because he doesn't know how to do it yet. He's not confident enough, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a very different story to be writing about someone discovering their powers, someone coming into their own, and in plot terms, developing these plot-breaking powers, basically.
Right.
Where, I mean, in a lot of stories, it is like once the hero gets all their powers, they win.
Right.
Like it's almost like, oh yeah, if you can just become a fully realized avatar, you'll just be able to
like, I love Captain Marvel. I think Captain Marvel is a much better story than a lot of people give it credit for because of the particular journey she goes on. Yeah. But to me, the fight scenes, the fight scene against her former mentor is really good because of the way she refuses to play his game.
Yeah.
But the fight scenes of her, like, just flying through spaceships and destroying them when she's completely... That's boring to me. Like,
yeah. I mean, there's no conflict, really, right? It's just like, oh, you've got your powers, now you just win.
Yeah, and to me, that's exactly why, like, a lot of the Superman stuff is boring to me. It's the same kind of thing. But so let's talk about Ahsoka. What do you? We basically had her go on this four episode journey arc. What do you think of her story and where she's come to?
So it looks like you'll get your wish, right? Of like her having to essentially face her Jedi past head on, not in terms of whether she wants to embrace her powers or be open about her past, but in terms of what her future is,
right?
And so I think these episodes set that up really well. The first episode was this very kind of small, tight story where it was very, just personal experience, and then the next 3 episodes really, I guess, are an arc where you take that out into space and
right.
you know, get involved with these crime syndicates. And it's like, well, that's not really what she wants to do either, but she did want to help these people. She seems very preachy still in a lot of spots, right? And honestly, I enjoyed it better when I only understood like 95% of what she was saying.
That's fair.
You know, then again, like, things don't get translated verbatim and the tone is different. So, you know, I guess I liked Spanish Ahsoka better than English Ahsoka. Because I did want to rewatch and make sure that I knew exactly like what you were talking about, essentially, in terms of the story you experienced, and most of our listeners, I assume.
I mean,
but you know, at this, I just want to say, like, when she does use her powers, like, so, you know, some of these people are dying like horrible deaths. Like, at one point, they're pulling on this guy, and then it seems like he probably got decapitated by this thing going up, and then that right, and then Rafa like pushes this guy off of you know, this thing, and I mean, you know, he's trying to kill her, so it's like, I don't blame her, but these feel like fairly grisly, screaming, horrible deaths, not of droids, right? They're of
in the review of The Mandalorian, which I was recording the last episode of tonight. We frequently commented that it seems like in The Mandalorian, cutting off a hand has now been replaced by the incredible unsafe doors that exist in the Star Wars universe. And apparently that trend was continued on to here. Yeah.
Yeah, those doors are dangerous. But so I guess, like, you know, they can just like kill these people because they're trying to kill them. Okay. But then, like, when Ahsoka like uses the Force to bring a couple of them out of hiding so that Trace can shoot them, it's like, is that really different than just like Force choking them?
Yeah, I had that feeling, especially when, like, okay, I think we're supposed to think the Pikes are all evil gangsters, and, like, I'm never quite okay with that, but, like, you know, desperado rules if you're working with a bad
I was
guy.
Going to say they're like Bucho's men.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? Like, how about the people who are just selling spice? Like, they show up, they steal spice. We know that spice can be used for drugs. We also know it can be used for medicine.
Yeah.
So we have no reason to think that the people who are, like, they're stealing spice from are, like, bad and evil.
Right.
And they just try to steal it. And then you're right. Those people are like, no, please don't steal it. We're going to fight you. And then they all die. And it was sort of like, really?
Or just the one guy dies, I think. Just the boss. And, you know, bosses are worse than, you know.
Yeah, you know, sort of like, you know, fight the power. But it definitely was a moment like that for me. Overall, I feel like, and granted, I don't think we're going to get, like, I don't know how much more we're going to get of this, but if you took just these 4 episodes and put them into, like, one story, this would make one hell of an origin story. Like, if you're telling me the story of, like, you know, the vigilante cop who'd been part of the police force and got forced out because of corruption on the force, and now they're, like, trying to find their way, and they're still going to do, like, do-gooder things, and they're still kind of a do-gooder, but they're trying to find life outside of the cops. Like, this is kind of the traditional arc of an origin story for a vigilante hero, and that's exactly what we get. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, like, at the end, it's like, oh, will you help the organization, like, do something? It's like, I don't know, I'll think about it. Like, you know, and, and that seems like it'll maybe be, like, the part 2. But, I like that parallel a lot. Like, I think I've seen, like, 8 Jet Li movies that are like that, or, you know, where...
I think a couple Bruce Lee movies, or not Bruce Lee, Bruce Willis movies. Bruce
like that. Yeah, I was thinking Die Hard. And I was like, I don't remember Bruce Lee in Die Hard, but yeah, exactly. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I really enjoyed this arc. You know, whatever. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times we end up talking about the things that we would have liked to be this way or that way, because I think it's often easier to kind of, you know, point out the things that you would have preferred to change, whereas like there's just a ton of stuff where it's like, well, this was great, that was great, so I did want to kind of just like restate, like, I really enjoyed the episodes, I really enjoyed the whole arc, and you know, I guess my biggest frustration would be a little bit like with Ahsoka, like as a character, not like with the writers as far as how they wrote her, but that like she really you know, she had this choice, you know, basically use her powers or not use her powers. But like, I think that was maybe less of a choice than like deliberately reveal her powers to her new friends, or basically make a kind of a non-choice to like not do that. Because at any moment she could do that, and then that's a final choice and it's done. Right? Whereas at any, like, she can always just not do it, and it's like she's not doing it, but that doesn't mean she's decided she won't. She just hasn't yet, and she's continuing to kind of leave herself those options, and you know, until then the story takes those options away, right? So I was a little disappointed sort of in her a little bit that she didn't say, okay, look, guys, like, I know you don't like the Jedi, like, I don't really like the Jedi either. I'm not one of them anymore.
but it was, right.
You know, I do have all this training, like, I could probably get us out of here. Like, let's argue about this later, but like, for now, like, you know, hey,
I got you.
Let's come up with a plan that understands, like, you know,
I definitely get that, and certainly, like, and maybe I missed something, but I kind of wish there had been more of a either a definitive plot reason why she would want her lightsabers with her, but she just doesn't have them, or a moment where she very definitively, clearly left them behind, because it feels like the lightsaber is the defining characteristic of a Jedi for many people, especially at this point in time, and like, how many times when people were shooting at her, it would have been so much easier if she had a damn lightsaber with her.
Right. I mean, at the very end, I think it would have been like when she grabs her bag, which I'm sure has her lightsabers in it. I imagine. You know, if she was like opening her bag and checking them and putting them away, like, you know, like Trey Serapha could be like, well, those would have been useful to have with us. Yeah. You know, like, at least just a little, you know, something about it.
I guess, and I feel like because obviously her not wanting people to know she's a Jedi was an important part of what she was doing. Yeah. I want to know, did she make a conscious choice to leave behind her lightsabers, or did she just like not get access to them because of the way the story played out?
Right. And it seemed like she deliberately left them behind, right? Like I mean, I remember when they got on the ship, it was kind of like, oh, okay, let's go get on the ship and go do this thing. What's this thing again?
Right.
But it's like, you know, she could have been like, give me 5 seconds. Like, oh, let me just get my bag. You know, that seems like a reasonable, like, let me just get my bag and then we'll do this thing. Maybe it's got my power bars in it.
Yeah, if nothing else, maybe like, you want to have yours with you, but also maybe like leaving super powerful laser death swords lying around a mechanic's office is not the best idea either.
The place might get robbed, you know? Like, you don't really want people just finding your lightsabers being like, oh, yeah, what do we have? Ah! You know?
Yeah, it's shiny.
Like, even just for the people who might steal them.
Yeah. I did like the sisters' evolution. I thought it was kind of interesting, especially when, like, there's one moment, and it's such a throwaway moment, and you're kind of like, whoa, that's a big character moment there, where Rafa is like, you know, don't try it, like, you know, we'll come back for you, don't worry about it. And then immediately to Trace is like, we're not coming back for her, she's dead.
Right, yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, that's, like, it makes sense, but, like, the fact that there's no consequences to that moment felt really weird to me.
Right. Well, and then later she is like, yeah, we're going back for her, and Trace is like, wait, what?
Well, I kind of like that she goes back for her mostly out of spite.
Yeah. Although, you know what? I think she probably didn't actually go back for her out of spite. That was like her alibi, sort of.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
you know,
that's why I said I liked it. I think that's the way she... Yeah. I kind of have a feeling, like, in the same way, like, we never saw this moment, but that there's a moment where Han and Chewie are in the Falcon, and Han says to Chewie, you know what? I can't let that kid do it by himself. He's going to be forever annoyed at me that I didn't save him, or forever taking all the glory. I got to go back and help him just because, like, I don't like him.
Yeah.
And Chewie's like, yeah, whatever, Mr. Hufflepuff. You're a Hufflepuff. You're going to save your friends. You know, I think it's that same kind of thing there. Like, Rafa is definitely the Han Solo of, like, sure, okay. Yeah,
I'll come up with some selfish justification for doing this thing that's actually incredibly dangerous, and that the rewards are way smaller than the risks, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the you know, material rewards.
Yeah. Yes, anything else on those? There's another big plot thing that I want to get into, but anything else on those?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they kind of, in a sort of offhanded way, also really dealt with the issue of consent, like in terms of, where Ahsoka's like, maybe this isn't the right life for Trace, and Rafa's like, she's like, well, if she doesn't want to do the job, she can say no. And Ahsoka's like, yeah, but is she going to say no to you? Like, you're her big sister. You have this, whether it's like a position of actual power or just she sees you in a certain way, I thought they sort of like raised that as a sort of like kind of thing to put in your mind without like really hammering on it, which I thought was nice. I thought.
I think that's a really good point, especially because you're right. It's an issue that can look easy on the surface, but has so much nuance both ways.
Yeah,
it's
on the one hand, not easy.
I think on the one hand, there's something kind of, nonsense about saying like, oh, they could always choose to, leave me to die. Like, of course, that's kind of dumb. But on the flip side, like, there can also be something incredibly manipulative about like, you're never allowed to make a dangerous choice because I'll make the same choice with you and you'll have to feel responsible for that, like.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a real give and take there of like finding out like how do two siblings or a parent and child or any two people find the balance there. And I appreciate that they didn't just make Trace the good one and Rafa the bad one.
Yeah, me too. They made them both, real characters where they both, Rafa, they each tend this way or that way, but like, they both make some stupid decisions that, they both do some smart things. They both show some heroism and some, kind of some fear in really rational spots. But, I liked that these two episodes really developed them more, beyond where in the first episode, of this pair, but of the 4-episode arc, basically, where they introduce Raph, like I was kind of like, okay, she feels kind of plot devicey, the sort of like family member who gets you into trouble, kind of.
Right.
But then by the end of this 4th episode, it's clear that she is in fact a character, as opposed to a device. And over the course of 4 episodes, like you should be able to take 3 characters and have them all have all that going on, and they did a good job with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's true. Let's talk about sort of some of the ways that this ties into kind of some of the larger plots. Obviously, they didn't go the direction I thought they were going to go with people on Pike, but instead made it about that they're all working for Darth Maul and the Crimson Dawn.
Right. Which kind of like references your favorite Star Wars film, right?
Yes. Well, okay. It references events that happen. Okay. The Crimson Dawn and Darth Maul is established completely in the Clone Wars TV show, and I think that's what it's referencing. There's also a movie that I rank slightly lower than watching George Lucas watch paint dry, which is a prequel about a fantastic character that I will not even speak the name of, that it also comes up in that, yes. And no, I'm not talking about quality cinema like the Star Wars Christmas special. I'm talking about something worse than that.
Just a quick apology to our listeners. I just have to take this moment to troll Matthew whenever possible.
It's true. Can't wait till we do our review of that movie. But yeah, that'll be a fun one. But yeah, I think it's fun. I like seeing that like there's all these different elements to the sort of criminal underworld. And it's especially because it's a nice reminder of like, and this is something I think that comes up a lot in the Clone Wars TV shows. Some of my favorite episodes are about like Cad Bane, or like the Hutts, or like people who are just like, oh, okay, you're all fighting each other over some dumb political thing that doesn't matter to us. Cool,
right? We'll
make money off of all of you. You
know? Yeah. And it sort of shows that, like, I mean, things like, the criminal underworld are going to persist into Imperial times, right? And to what extent, we don't entirely know, except in some cases we do kind of know. And, I mean, there's obviously going to be corruption within the Empire the same way there's corruption within the Republic, right?
Right.
And so I think it does sort of speak to the kind of the depth and the richness of the universe, and that there's like a whole lot of groups of people who just aren't involved directly with, the struggle of the that is the focus of the the plots of all the like movies, right? But like those people exist and those organizations exist within the universe.
And I will say that I think one of the things that I think to some extent the movies, but especially also some of the books, including the books that are written like post-severing, and these books are considered canon, they do really get into the idea that part of why there was so much criminal activity at that point was because of how weak and ineffective the Republic had become, and that was part of the Separatists' like complaint about the Republic, and that in the Separatist worlds, at least, there was much more of a crackdown on that kind of thing, and that at least in the early years of the Empire, there was also much more of a crackdown on that kind of thing. And to its credit, I will say, although like I don't think the movie that shall not be named does not quite fully take into account of it. It's part of why I think the first line of the opening scroll is flat out false. One of the themes of that movie is that the world in which the criminal underworld people can operate is getting smaller and smaller and smaller because of the Empire encroaching. But let's if you don't mind, I want to take it to the other kind of piece of big uber plot that it ties into, which is the Mandalorians show up. And are kind of like they're watching and then getting involved. What's your take on what's happening with them?
So at first when they show up and we don't really know, I mean, I didn't recognize the voice. I was like, you'd had it in my head about Ventress, and I was like, why is Ventress wearing like a Mandalorian?
I know, I kind of had the same thought as well.
I was like, that would be really weird, but like, okay.
Yeah.
I'll pay to watch that. Then them showing up is like, I'm trying to remember like what happened between them and anyone else who would be in this episode. Like, why were they there with the Pikes? Like, was that a story? I kind of remember those as separate storylines, but
so here's my theory, and I might be totally off the wall here, but I'm interested if this is true, and if they're setting this up, this is a brilliant bit of meta-ness. Which is because the Mandalorians have come and said, like, it's a shared enemy thing, and we need your help, from Ahsoka.
Yeah.
We also know that at this point, the Mandalorians have been kind of fighting to kind of keep their independence from both the Republic and the Separatists, and to kind of stay out of all of it. Now, flash forward, in a different part of, for a different set of episodes on this podcast, as I said, I've been rewatching all of the episodes of The Mandalorian. And tonight we're actually going to be recording on the last episode, episode 8, and so I've been talking about that. And I was going to say, if you've not yet seen The Mandalorian, skip forward a couple of minutes, because I'm going to talk about some things that are referenced pretty heavily in The Mandalorian. Because in The Mandalorian, they keep referencing this terrible thing that happened like 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was how, like, it was the destruction of Mandalore and all this kind of thing that happened. And, like, that's part of why the Mandalorians are all scattered. And they reference that it kind of happened, like, I think they kind of make mention of it happening, like, before the Emperor came to power, like, in that kind of time period. In the last episode that I just watched, Moff Gideon spends a good deal of time talking about how the weapon he was using was an essential part of the siege of Mandalore.
Oh, you're talking about the Mandalorian episode.
The episode of The Mandalorian. Yeah, the TV show The Mandalorian.
Yeah. I was like, I don't remember seeing that just now. Okay.
Well, that's what I'm saying is, and then the Mandalorians in the Clone Wars show up and say, Ahsoka, we need your help.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we're about to go see the Siege of Mandalore.
I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. Here's my double concern then. If that's true, then they're telling us that the Mandalorian and the Clone Wars are, I mean, obviously they're the same part of the same canon, but that they're linked, and that to some extent the writers were aware of each other. Yeah.
Well, they have to be linked now, right? I mean, because we know also, spoilers for The Mandalorian, I guess, that Ahsoka is going to show up in that show. And so, which sort of raised the question, like, well, how does she know the Mandalorians? Like, how is she going? So yeah, I think absolutely. I think there must have been some dialogue.
But it raises for me one major question: why does the Mandalorian take her helmet off? Like, it's the one. I mean, right? Like,
this is not the way.
it's the one thing about the Mandalorian TV show that has thrown. I mean, how do you have a family dinner if none of you can see each other's faces? Like, there's the extent to which, like, this whole idea of never removing the helmet seems kind of cool and badass until you then think about it more and realize, like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. But it's good for social distancing and not spreading.
It's very good for social distancing. We should have been telling people this is the way. I'm all for that.
Yes, this is the way.
And they could very easily say it as, like, ever since the destruction of Mandalore, there's been the Nomad's path, and that the Nomads never take, like, something like that. But
so maybe that'll, like, turn out, and maybe, like, Ahsoka will show up in the Mandalorian and be like, you guys used to take your helmets off. I don't know what's up with this thing now. Like, like.
I just need them in some way reference that inconsistency, because it's just so glaring right now.
Yes. No, for sure. I mean, but it speaks to, I think, so that's a very good question. Very good question. The only way that I think it can be answered in a satisfying fashion is, like, these are Mandalorians from Mandalore from back in the day, and that the Mandalorians in the future, or in the later period of time, which is also a long time ago, I guess, far away, is, like, those, it's like, I was going to say religion, but it's like, it's a culture, right, that's been passed down very deliberately, but is different than, it's like, that's not, like, what everyone on Mandalore was doing, right?
Right.
Maybe this is, like, maybe something happens in these episodes that actually explains, like, why they're like, okay, we're never taking our helmets off again.
Right.
I don't know. I find that a very interesting question, and I look forward to seeing whether or not there's a satisfying answer.
Yeah.
But I'm prepared to be disappointed.
And I'm going to definitely talk about it twice, because when we watch the episode of The Mandalorian, talk with the episode of The Mandalorian tonight with Jeff Randall, we'll bring this up again, because it's such a good episode, but then one other quick rant about it. I'm sorry again, skip ahead, but this is just a minor thing. There's also an episode, I know, because you've seen all The Mandalorian, right?
I have.
Yeah, I knew that. I just wanted to triple check.
Yeah.
There's a point in which, and this just goes up to the same thing you and I have complained about, where our hero brings the child to one of the other Mandalorians and is like, what is this thing? What do I do with it? And she references that he's part of an ancient group of space wizards who used to be our enemy, and he called the Jedi. And he's like, the Jedi? What are these? What could this be? And you're like, you see episodes of him flashing back to when he's like 8 years old during the Clone Wars. Like,
right.
How do you not know who the,
I know.
If the NBA goes away for 20 years, I'm not going to believe a story about someone born 20 years from now who's like, LeBron James. What is that name? I've never heard those words before.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, think back to, like, 1995,
Yeah.
Like, I mean, sometimes it's like, wow, that was a while ago. But it's not like, what was a modem?
Yeah.
Or
listen, I know enough.
What was a blockbuster?
I know enough.
That's what it is. The Jedi are the blockbusters.
There you go. I know enough.
They were once everywhere, and now there's only one or two.
Yeah. And do you get family video in your neck of the woods? Family Video is a store that I'm convinced is just a chain of drug fronts. Because I have no idea how you still make money selling videos these days. Oh.
Right. Yeah, probably. That sounds right.
Anyway.
I mean, not to besmirch their good name, but...
yeah, sorry if we're going to get lawsuited. Now that we are fairly...
Maybe they sell vinyl.
Yeah. Excuse me. Now that we are fairly deep into tangent land, is there any last comments you want to make, or should we wrap this up?
There was a thought that was coalescing until you brought up family. Oh, yeah, the child is like, what, 25? At this point in time?
I think
20,
at least
25?
30. Yeah.
30? Yeah. So it really is truly bizarre when you think about, just the time that elapses and how short it is, and yet how grand it feels, the way they talk about it. That's maybe if I had to pick a single biggest complaint about the Star Wars universe, it would probably be that, like, it's so epic. It takes place over such a wide period, expanse of space, right?
Right.
So many star systems. It feels like it takes place over such an expanse of time, but actually, it's like, it's really quite concentrated for the most part. You know, I mean, there is actually a substantial amount of time, more substantial, I guess it feels, between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, I guess.
Yeah, I actually read a timeline last night, and it specifically says that, like, the Emperor comes to power 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, and
right.
Return of the Jedi is actually only 4. I always thought it was like 10 years later. Return of the Jedi is only 4 years after the Battle of Yavin, and then Force Awakens is 30 years later.
Right. So the 30 years, like, feels more like not really a satisfying, reasonable amount of time for people to forget everything about the Jedi and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, better than, what do you say, 19 years? Between the Clone Wars and A New Hope.
Yeah, 19 years.
19 years. That's not a lot of time.
Yeah. It's,
you know, for this just societal forgetting to happen.
I mean, the interpretation that I always had of what happened in the past, based on what is said in the original trilogy of movies, was that, like, 500, 600, 1,000 years ago, the purge of the Jedi began. To the point where, for, like, centuries, most people thought the Jedi were wiped out, and there was a small number of them just barely hanging on. And one of them was this guy named Anakin Skywalker, who betrayed the last of the Jedi and caused the last of the Jedi to be killed.
Right.
That makes so much more sense. That fits the story in a way.
It does.
Yeah.
I'd watch those prequels.
I'd watch almost any other prequel, but yeah. Anyway, I think then we're pretty much in tangent land, so we start wrapping up. Paul, as always, thank you. Listeners, as always, thank you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on email. All the links are in the show notes. Also, starting at the end of this week, and especially going next week, due to our friends at the MCU Cast, the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, and all the Stranded Panda podcasts, we're doing a big review push for my sister podcast that Paul helped start, Superhero Ethics. From now until next Sunday, if you write a review of Superhero Ethics, hopefully giving us 5 stars, you will get entered into a chance to win a t-shirt from either Superhero Ethics or the MCU. That'll only be for the people who've written reviews, 5-star reviews for Superhero Ethics. You'll also get entered into a larger drawing with all the people who've written reviews for any Stranded Panda podcast, and the winner of that will get a copy of the Avengers video game that I believe is going to come out for a number of different platforms. You can get it in the platform of your choice, and that will be in the fall of this year. So, and you know, if you don't think we deserve a 5-star review, we still would love to hear what your thoughts anyway. Let us know what you think. Let us know what we could do better. Let us know what we're doing worse. You know, obviously, please don't write a 5-star review and just say, I'm just doing this for the video game. Like, write an actual review, please, whatever you're going to do. But whether it's 5 stars or less, we'd love to know what you're thinking. And we just want to know what you think about these episodes. What are you enjoying? What do you think could be different? What do you think is great about it? Write in, let us know, let us talk to you about it. So I'm having Paul, myself, everybody involved. Thank you all so much. May the Force be with you.
5 Sterne, bitte.
Da.
That's Russian.
And we're out. What does that mean?
Oh, 5 stars, please.
That's brilliant. I like it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. 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 I I have not. No. that didn't happen. Yeah. Yeah.